I don't like being made fun of.
Am I making fun of you?
No, I meant people watching us.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I look at the camera and I go,
They also find
really?
in Jackson County. No. I'm totally guessing.
It's true.
Oh, I believe you.
Okay, well, you were looking at me like, stop talking.
Well, I'm not very good at doodle-ooting.
Doodaloo, doodaloo, doodaloo. I probably practice more than I should.
I'm good at...
And I quit.
At the time, okay? Okay.
Okay. You get to apply for parole at any sort. Blah. They found on the flannel. They found on the
They plowned on the flannel.
They found on the flannel shirt up your nose with the rubber hose.
Better than up your button around the corner. But anyway, there's a female detective. Yeah, you become immune to your own stench, which is why I'm so gracious and generous sitting next to you. Okay, of Hyde's home. One of the most critical discoveries.
With the evidence they have from the torso, can they actually glean familial DNA off of it?
Glean. There's that word again. I don't know if you glean DNA, but go ahead.
You can glean whatever you want.
Okay.
I'm going to glean this episode right now. You just sit there and glean yourself quiet.
I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this
is Killer Destinations.
Today's destination is Jacksonville Beach, Florida. This city was originally called Pablo Beach when it was formed in 1886, and it was a historic hub for the surrounding communities, known for its lively atmosphere and family-friendly beach activities. The humid subtropical climate and beautiful sunsets draw visitors all year long, as well as snowbirds from the eastern seaboard during the winter season. But in 2015, it was discovered that the lapping waves and the beautiful sunsets belied the grim and brutal activities that took place in one little cottage decades prior.
In 2015, two sisters were researching cold cases on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. It didn't say why. I don't know if they were true crime podcasters and they wanted to be, or they were just, interested and decided to take a look. But they were on there. They found a missing poster that described a John Doe, and they were looking to identify who this person was. Their torso had been found in a dumpster behind a gas station in Lake City, Florida in 1994, so 21 years earlier. The description of the person identified a young male, ages 15 to 22, about 5'8", Caucasian, and they thought maybe he had brown hair. So Kathy, they had a cousin named Fred Laster who was 16 years old when he went missing 21 years earlier. So the two sisters called their cousins. Altogether, Fred had 6 siblings, and they called them and said, hey, there's this information on the website. It kind of sounds like Freddie. You guys need to take a look at it. When Fred Laster's siblings went to look on the website, it actually described things that resonated with them. It described a flannel shirt that they recognized. And it also talked about bath decals. So remember those like floral ones back in like the 80s and whatnot that you had on the bottom of the bathtub so that you didn't slip or so kids didn't slip? That's the kind
we didn't have any. I wanted them, but my mom wouldn't get them.
I'm sorry. So after talking with Fred's siblings, Fred actually had a twin sister named Daisy. She called police so that they could find out, is this their brother? Backing up to finding this torso, it was 21 years earlier in a summer June morning in 1994, and a woman had been driving on Interstate 10 and started having mechanical issues with her car. So she got off the exit, and there happened to be a BP gas station that was just right off the off-ramp. So she pulled into it because she wanted to see if a mechanic was there to take a look at her car. Now, she was going to have to wait for a little while, and she had a dog in the car with her. So what she decided to do was take the dog for a little walk just to kill time and wait to see what the mechanic said. She takes the dog. The dog is kind of immediately pulling on the leash towards an area of dumpsters. She follows the dog over there, and it immediately goes to this very large black trash bag. So not like the hefty bags that we use at home, but rather even larger than that. Like you might use at a work site or something like that. The bag that this dog was sniffing at was behind a dumpster. And as the woman got closer to it, she smelled a very, very strong odor of bleach. So the dog, of course, goes running over, starts nosing around at it, and there had been the bag had been torn, and the dog just happened to kind of nose it in the right way that it made it open up. The woman saw what she thought, and I'm actually guessing hoped, looked like a mannequin. So she immediately takes her dog back to the BP gas station and talks to the owner who's looking at her car, and he's like, all right, let me go with you. So he goes along with her back to the dumpster, and he looks into the bag, and sure enough, it's a human torso.
So deputies from the Columbia County Sheriff's Office arrived on the scene, and they saw that the torso belonged to a male. There were no arms. They had been severed at the elbows, and there were no legs. They had been severed just below the pelvic bone. And here's what is so very bizarre. The buttocks and the legs were missing, leaving only the genitalia. So very strange. The victim also had a mole located on his lower right chest. One of the things that immediately struck detectives was the fact that the incisions looked so precise and so surgical, almost like somebody knew what they were doing. Not only were the cuts super precise on this torso, but the body had been scrubbed clean, consistent with the first witness smelling bleach. Detectives also noticed that there was no decay on the torso, and it was not in rigor. So they knew that this person, whoever it was, had not died long ago. So, of course, detectives look inside the dumpster for any evidence that they can find. And they find more black trash bags, no surprise. So they open these bags, and inside they find, obviously, evidence connected to their crime. They find an egg crate mattress, and on it was what appeared to be bone particles and flesh and blood. They obviously know this is connected to their crime. They also found orange latex gloves, and these were just the kind that you use to wash dishes, and a red, white, and blue men's checkered shirt, like a plaid flannel. Mm-hmm. They found 2 Ginsu knives. One had a serrated 8-inch blade, and one had a 3-inch blade. And lastly, they found the non-stick dark green bathtub decals, the decals that Kath mentioned previously, along with all this other stuff. So one of the things that was very significant was that the checkered shirt had blood on it. And detectives also noticed that the side of the dumpster had blood. And so they surmised that the individual who left the torso here was not strong enough to actually get it up inside the dumpster, and that it slid, which is how the bag probably got torn. Yeah. Blood was left on the side of the dumpster.
And then he just pulled it behind the dumpster so that nobody would see it. Because imagine if that torso had been in the dumpster, that dog likely would not have found it.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
So the torso was taken to the medical examiner's office in Jacksonville and naturally was examined. And the pathologist determined that the victim was a young man between 15 and 22 years of age, as we said. And I believe this was mentioned on the missing persons poster.
Correct.
And he was 5'8" in height, and he had brown hair. The mole was also found, and obviously you're hoping to identify unique marks on an individual's body, especially in a situation like this. So the medical examiner also found that in this young man's system was over-the-counter cold medication, leading detectives to believe that he was possibly drugged and incapacitated so that he could be dismembered. Horrific.
Yeah.
Detectives turned to local law enforcement to find out if there were any missing persons that matched the description of the young man. And they also looked at federal databases, and unfortunately, they came up empty. There were no usable fingerprints on anything. And of course, this is 1994. That's really what people were looking for at the time. However, there was blood on the shirt, on the checkered shirt and the egg crate. Now,
The mattress topper.
yes, DNA existed at the time, but it wasn't common. It was in its infancy.
And definitely very rudimentary compared to what it is now.
Absolutely. But detectives preserved all of this evidence perfectly, knowing that they had to be able to match it to someone at some point.
Lake City, Kath, where the body was found, was a small town. And so, of course, gossip happens at the speed of light. And this was no different than any other situation. A witness came forward and told police that around 7 a.m. that morning, so this was June 5th, about 3 hours before the torso was found, this man had been driving home from working the night shift. So the man said that he came across this dumpster and just thought it was really odd and kind of suspicious that there was a Camaro that was backed up to the dumpster with its trunk open. And he saw that there was somebody in the driver's seat, but couldn't see it clearly enough, or couldn't see the person clearly enough to even know if it was male or female. But at least the police kind of have an idea of, if the torso was dumped, then we need to worry about this car. Like, maybe this is a good jumping off point. Now, of course, you know, the torso found by itself made national headlines, probably international headlines at the time as well. And America's Most Wanted and Crime Stoppers and all of the news programs at the time covered it, hoping that somebody would know something, either to identify the person or identify the person who maybe was the one responsible for the death, or at least the mutilation, to come forward. But despite this media blitz, Kath, detectives didn't really get a whole lot of tips. So of course they followed up on every single lead, but every one of them was a dead end. So by the end of 1994, the case had gone cold. But we're gonna doodaloo to 2010. It's almost 16 years after this torso was found, and DNA has made advancements by leaps and bounds. And remember, you had talked about the fact that they had blood on the flannel shirt, they had the mattress topper, they had the orange gloves that, you know, might have DNA in it. And so officers sent all of these items back to the lab. They were able to get DNA off these items, but unfortunately, when they entered it into national databases, and I'm sure Florida databases as well, there was no record of anyone with this DNA having been incarcerated, because of course, that's where it was coming from back then, right? Fortunately, Kathy, they were able to get 2 partial male DNA profiles. So of course, the hope is that this will lead them to not only the victim, but the killer as well. But unfortunately, because they still didn't have anybody, the evidence now went back into storage.
So fast forward to 2015, when these 2 cousins saw the missing persons poster, and Daisy called law enforcement and said, "I think this might be my twin brother." Immediately, law enforcement took this seriously. Columbia County Detective Jimmy Watson went to talk to Daisy, and Daisy told him that Freddie, as everyone called him, had gone missing from Jacksonville, Florida in June of 1994. Now, detectives then talked to all the siblings and asked details about when he went missing, et cetera, et cetera. And then they were asked, how come he wasn't reported missing?
Right, because at this point, it's 21 years later.
Correct. And they said he was reported missing. They called local law enforcement, I think it was 3 weeks to a month after he had gone missing, but local law enforcement didn't document it. I just want to tell you a little bit about the family, because 3 weeks is a long time not to report a missing 16-year-old boy. There were a total of 7 kids in this family. The parents divorced, mom died, and the kids were kind of free-range children. A couple of the siblings were old enough to be out on their own.
Right. And remember, there were 7, and actually Freddie and Daisy were the youngest kids.
Exactly. Grandma, who lived in Yulee, was the home base. And Kathy and I don't know exactly when the mother died. We tried to find that information.
We think we found it, but we can't prove it.
After their mother died, you know, the core of the family fell apart, and they had a lot of freedom. And so even though the twins were 16 years old, they traveled wherever they wanted to. They went wherever they wanted to.
I don't even know that they were in school.
I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming they were, but I don't know.
Right.
They had a long leash. There was nobody, reining them in. It wasn't unusual for Freddie to be away from the house for a week or
even longer than that.
Exactly.
I mean, they don't have cell phones, right? So you're not calling or texting or anything like that. And, if you're hanging out at someone else's house and the other one's at grandma's house and whatnot, how are you going to find him?
So basically at about the 3-week mark, the siblings were like, okay, where's Freddie? We got to call the police. And again, like I said, no report was actually made about it. And this is true speculation, but I am sure that detectives realized that Freddie was a free spirit, had a lot of freedom, and I'm guessing, again, speculation, that they just simply believed he ran away.
Right. He'd come home when he was ready.
7 to 8 months later, one of Freddie's older sisters went back to the police and said, he has not come home. At this point, now this is 1995, Freddie's name was entered into the federal missing persons database.
For the first time.
For the first time.
And she was like, I'm sitting here until I see you write it.
Exactly. That would be so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, just not knowing where your sibling is.
But really a couple weeks versus 8 months. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that's what made the difference. So back to 2015, the Columbia County Sheriff's detectives now want to be able to see if, with the evidence they have from the torso, can they actually glean familial DNA off of it?
Glean. There's that word again. I don't know if you glean DNA, but go ahead.
You can glean whatever you want.
Okay.
I'm going to glean this episode right now. You just sit there and glean yourself quiet. The sheriff's detectives reach out to one of the labs to find out if they can glean this familial DNA. A couple of Freddie's siblings actually contributed DNA, including his twin Daisy. They found that it was a match. So they now knew that torso belonged to Freddie Laster. So Kath, now that they actually can identify this as being Freddie's DNA, they checked it against the partial DNA profiles they'd found from the flannel shirt and confirmed that it did belong to Freddie. So now, of course, the assumption is that the second DNA profile likely belongs to his killer. Now, of course, that they know that this is Freddie, they need to start the task of going doodly-doo back 21 years to figure out what did Freddie's last hours, days, and weeks look like, hoping to be able to find a clue to who might have done this to him. So as Kath said, they were free-range kids, and they could do whatever they wanted. Basically, they grew up at grandma's house, which is where some of them stayed. But Freddie was actually known to stay at his sister's house. He was known to stay at friends' houses. And it wasn't just like, when I think about doing that, if I in high school was going to go crash on someone's couch, it might have a 2-mile radius.
Right.
And from where his grandparents were in Yulee to like one of the houses he crashed in Jacksonville Beach, that was like 40 miles away.
Serious distance.
Yeah. So I wouldn't have gone 40 blocks away. That wasn't my span. But again, I think that just attests to the fact that they really were free range kids.
Totally.
One interesting thing, though, that came up for police is that they belonged to a church. Now, it wasn't a typical religion. It was a church actually that was founded by a group of friends. It was called Strength for Living Church, but the kids kind of found like a nest there, as it were. It was family. They became very comfortable there, and they had a band, and Freddie loved the music. It was actually something that really drew a lot of the kids to this church, was the music that was played in the band that they had. And so it was one of the things that his siblings actually thought at the beginning is, did Freddie go on tour with the band? Because he had talked about wanting to do such a thing.
Yeah, he was in the band. I believe he played guitar. He was supposedly a very good musician.
Right. And one of the things about this church as well is that they had a youth pastor. His name was Ronnie Hyde. And this was somebody who Freddie really kind of got along with. Ronnie was part of the process of forming the band and overseeing it. And he lived down in Jacksonville Beach, which was about 40 miles away. So that was one of the houses that he crashed at when he was in the area.
This pastor was known to help the young kids. And Freddie's family was very, let's say, modest means. They were a very modest means.
Well, I think that that's actually even an overstatement. I think they were poor.
Yeah. And so he was known to give them food, give them clothing.
He would give them rides to the church to make sure they could go there.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. So he was somebody that everybody knew that the Laster family sort of was connected to this man, and
he was taking care of them.
Right. Like somewhat leaned on.
Right. He took care of that parental role. Some of the siblings, as they were recounting Freddie's last actions, those, as I said, those hours, days, and weeks before he disappeared, most of them said that they thought he had been crashing at Ronnie Hyde's house for some of that time.
Because they also knew, like, it was not unusual for Freddie or one of his older brothers, although his older brother sort of grew out of staying at the pastor's home. But it wasn't unusual for Freddie to spend many days at a time there. And he actually traveled out of state with his pastor on 2 occasions, at least. And so it just, it was one of the houses that Freddie bounced back and forth from.
But in fact, Freddie's older sister told police that she had spoken with Freddie. She was the last one to speak to him on the last day that anybody heard from him. And Freddie actually said to his sister that he was at Ronnie Hyde's house at that point. Obviously, because Ronnie was the last person that police are aware of that Freddie saw, they want to check this guy out. The first thing the detectives did was put Ronnie under surveillance. And shortly after that, they actually had what they called a trash pull done, meaning, of course, what we always hear about, that the trash goes out to the curb to be taken out. The police swoop in and grab some trash bags and go and see, let's check this guy. Let's get his DNA. Let's run him through the databases.
Exactly.
Let's find out who this guy's about.
And it doesn't require a warrant because there's no expectation of privacy in things that you discard and are left on public streets to pick up. So
they actually had some nasal swabs that they found in there. Once they had these nasal swabs, they, of course, sent the DNA to the lab for analysis.
So almost a year after detectives went through Hyde's trash, officers executed a search warrant at his Jacksonville Beach home. And Kath, the descriptions of this search were totally disgusting. It was not just a hoarder's home. It was completely foul, like completely foul, filthy, etc. And the crime scene techs and investigators had to wear respirators. One of the most critical discoveries in one of his bathrooms, in the bathtub, there was an impression of a floral decal, and it was missing. It was more than one, I believe.
I think all of them were gone.
And his bathtub was so scummy that the outlines of these decals were left in the dirt and grime over 2 decades later.
They were preserved for posterity.
It's totally like the headline, like Florida man doesn't wash his bathtub.
Exactly. Ever.
Yeah. They also found egg crates in the home, similar to the one that was found in the dumpster. And the one that was found in the dumpster had been cut. So imagine like an egg crate that you buy, like it's a queen mattress egg crate, and you just cut it in half and you use it. They found cut egg crates similar in nature in his home.
And you know what I was thinking though, Kath? Like, if it's that disgusting, what kid, I mean, kids are stinky too, but what kid wants to stay there? But then I realized that was more than 20 years later. Like, I bet it was bad, but it got so much worse.
Exactly. And one other thing, Kath, they brought in a bunch of industrial equipment to dig in the yard, hoping that they would find the missing parts of Freddie Laster's body. Nothing was found in the yard. However, detectives bring him in for an interview. There was a female detective and a male detective, and the female detective was the good cop and the male detective was the bad cop. And unbeknownst to Mr. Hyde, the female detective was actually an FBI agent. And I think she played things pretty well.
I think so too.
You know, like she
played the whole like, oh, you know, like I kind of felt like she was like, I'm over my head, but like, just talk to me. Like, how are you feeling? And I don't know what else to ask you. So just tell me what you're like. What do you like to do? I mean, it was like almost like she was on speed date, you know?
But yeah, she was trying to like make him comfortable, because she then got into things like, what kind of websites do you look at? And she's specifically referring to porn sites. And so he tells her, well, I don't pay for porn. I just look at the, the publicly available things, but I don't look at kids, that kind of thing.
And he's like, oh, and I don't have a specific site because I can't pay for it. So I just go wherever I can get it for free.
So the investigators are initially trying to keep things light, and they're asking about Ronnie Hyde's relationship with the Laster family, which of course was very easy for him to talk about. And he talked about how he had met Freddie's older brother years prior, and now he's a mentor to Freddie and kind of like a foster parent and that kind of stuff. He also talked about their participation in the Strength for Living Church.
I think we're going to put church in quotes.
Which was not about weightlifting.
Yes. So, Kath, one of the things I also read is that the FBI agent / good cop detective, the things that she was asking him, like, tell me about your background, tell me whatever, she already knew all the answers to. Yeah. She just wanted to see how he was going to talk about it.
I mean, they do that on purpose because they're all freaking experts at reading body language.
Right,
like,
exactly.
what's his body language in a... And I just read a book on this, so it's a fascinating topic to me. But anyway, so yeah, you get their stasis of comfort, and then you're like...
Well, also, you find out how they phrase it for you. Like, how are they trying to present it to you when you know that's not true, or it is true, or whatnot?
Exactly. One of the things that kind of blew me away is that in this interview, Ronnie Hyde told them that he was a mentor for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for youth sex offenders. And this was like a legit job under the Department of Corrections.
And this was in the 70s.
Correct. And it turns out that Ronnie Hyde had earned a psychology degree. I can't remember what university he went to.
It was the University of Florida.
He was a licensed counselor. And through the course of his studies, he actually had to take an anatomy class and had a book on anatomy. Theoretically, he would have known how a dismemberment could have taken place.
So, Kathy, as you said, we have the good cop and the bad cop, and Detective Bad Cop would leave when Detective Good Cop needed to be all like, hey. Yeah. So the male detective got up and left, and the FBI agent said to Hyde, so what's your sexual orientation? Like, how do you identify? I mean, do you
not
like
to make you uncomfortable or anything?
And that's what she kept saying. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but like, who do you like to go out with? Do you like boys? Do you like girls? And Hyde once again said, "No, I don't like boys. I like women." But as a youth counselor and helping troubled teens, I work with a lot of gay kids. So sometimes I'll be around as young gay men interact, which I'm assuming was a euphemism.
Right.
So that when any of these young men come to me for counseling, I am desensitized to this notion of what they're doing together.
I'm sure the FBI agent was like, okay, sideshow freak.
Or like, can you see me rolling my eyes?
Right.
I mean, the thing about this too with Hyde is that all these things that he was saying about, oh no, I watch porn. Of course, I'm a red-blooded American man, but not kids. Well, she hadn't asked him if he liked kids or watched kids. You know what I mean? Like, none of this had to do
he was
with it.
volunteering that information.
Exactly, which just made it all look wrong. And one of the other things he apparently really liked to do was go down to the YMCA. I'm sure this is all part of the desensitization process. He would go down to the YMCA showers, get into the showers, of course, with no clothes on. But I guess the way that they were set up at the YMCA, he could then watch all the naked young men at their lockers.
They're doing this whole good cop, bad cop thing. So at some point, the bad cop came in and dropped the hammer.
And they'd already been there, Kathy, for hours and hours.
Exactly. Like 6 hours, I want to say. And told Ronnie Hyde that Freddie Laster's body was found. And so, of course, Ronnie asks, how was Freddie identified? Were they able to get DNA? And the bad cop goes, yeah, we have DNA. And there's 2 matches. Freddie's and yours. Boom. Total mic drop. So they explained to Hyde how they had taken his DNA, found his DNA on the nasal swabs.
Zicam for the win.
Exactly. And then matched them to the DNA on the checkered flannel shirt. So what happens? Mr. Hyde was arrested. Detectives also told Hyde that there was a witness who saw his charcoal gray Camaro at the dumpster where Freddie's torso was found. And they also told him that they spoke with Freddie's older brother, who informed them that Hyde had, for the last 20 years, been using his position as a children's pastor to groom and molest young boys. And they were informed that one of Freddie's sisters and Freddie were spending the night at Hyde's house decades prior, when the sister awoke in the middle of the night to find a nude Hyde trying to awaken Freddie. So after this 6-hour conversation / interrogation
/ good cop, bad cop / FBI agent.
Exactly. Hyde invoked his right to counsel.
On March 6, 2017, so Kath, this is 23 years after Freddie Laster was killed, Ronnie Hyde was arrested for his murder. And interestingly, Kath, in the days following Hyde's arrest, the authorities put up billboards asking for anyone with information about Hyde and his proclivities to come forward. And Kath, as soon as they did this, immediately tips came flooding into an FBI tip hotline. Former coworkers of his, Kathy, actually reported that Ronnie would walk around the office and talk about the fact that he would have underage young boys at his house, and they would all hang out and then go to sleep wearing only underwear. And other witnesses said that Ronnie would brag about going to the golf course just so he could ogle young boys who were there. I'm sure young teenage boys who were there. The YMCA information I told you about, that's where this came from as well.
I can't, it's so disappointing because people know instinctively when somebody else is a lowlife. However, I do have to say that
this was 70s, 80s, and 90s. 70s and 80s.
70s are crap. Many bad things happened in the 70s, and it was part of the culture coming out of the 60s. People who are predators are so manipulative, and they're able to hide often because they're so good at blending in and just mimicking what a normal person is supposed to behave like. However, with him joking, couldn't you see somebody in the office being like, oh, ha, 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 joke, joke, joke. Yep. I'm joking about this.
They're going, oh, he's just making a bad joke.
Oh, that's a tasteless joke. Right. This guy's a little weird. I'm going to stay away from him. But do I really believe he's laying with children in just underwear? No. You know what I mean? People talk themselves out of it.
Oh, totally. Well, look at Michael Jackson. And remember, you had talked about the fact that in the 70s, he worked for the Jacksonville Police Department working with young prison inmates. Mm-hmm. Quite a few of these young men came forward and said that Hyde had abused them as part of his interaction with them for this program.
And these are young sex offenders,
right,
who have no credibility. And of course, in their mind, why am I even going to snitch on them? No one's going to believe me.
Right. Exactly. And nobody would have.
Nobody would have.
And again,
nobody would have.
This was in the 1970s.
Yeah. It's like what we talked about before the podcast, where you said something like,
if you want to find the predator, find the prey.
Exactly. And
it's true.
It's true, and it's sad.
The other thing, Kath, I was going to tell you is that, and I thought this was interesting, after Ronnie Hyde was arrested, Kathy, the FBI also did a search. So he's already in prison. The FBI execute a search warrant because they're looking for interstate child porn. They find 6 discs. It was like a terabyte of video and photographic information. They seize it. Remember, this is the hoarder house. They seize it, and they promptly condemned the house, boarded it up, and it was destroyed, flattened, nothing left within a month of his arrest. So if he'd even gotten out of prison, he wouldn't have had anything to go home to.
The health department was, yay.
Exactly. They were like, how can we help you? Ronnie Hyde's trial started in March of 2022. This is now 28 years after Freddie Laster was killed. Mm-hmm. And almost 5 years after Hyde was arrested.
And he was spending time in jail pending trial. So prosecutors presented a very dramatic case to the jury, and most of the jurors, well, actually all of the jurors, I believe, during voir dire admitted to knowing something about the case. But how can you not, as highly publicized as this case was, as you talked about?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, basically a juror has to say, I could set my bias aside or whatever. Anyway, they all pass voir dire, so to speak. So the prosecutor, again, opened up with the drama of the torso being found. He presented his case in 3 days, and the defense countered with 1. So this was only a 4-day trial.
That's crazy.
I know, it is crazy. In those 3 days, he had 17 witnesses. So he was very efficient with the way he presented his evidence. And if my memory serves me,
Which it doesn't.
which usually it doesn't. So I'm probably wrong when I'm going to say this, but I believe he ended with the DNA evidence. So he put on the witness who talked about seeing the Camaro, in the like hours before the torso was found. The officers testified about the 6-hour interview and the things that he said during that interview, but just everything about how the torso was discovered, came into evidence. And also something that came into evidence was I'm going to call it a journal. I think it was a calendar book where he had notations. Okay. And so, but he would write things on there that were, obviously on his mind.
Diary-esque.
Diary-esque. I like that. Yes, exactly. And so he had vague apologies, I'm going to call them. So it said things like, I'm feeling depressed. I need to apologize to Fred and Travis. Like he named, I want to say 4 names.
Daniel D.
There was another one, but
Jasmine.
Jasmine. The defense fought to keep this out, but it was admissible. And it went to, it was something that was indicative of his state of mind. And it was in his penmanship found, in the home, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the entries said, I feel depressed, lonely. I'm struggling to stay alive. I've been thinking about people from whom I need forgiveness. And then he mentions the 4 people that we talked about. And Fred's name was underlined several times. What we learned later is that Jasmine and David D. were victims of Hyde, and he had taken camcorder video of them, and they were children. Anyway, so although the defense fought to have this diary/journal out, it came in as evidence. And
well, it certainly speaks to what happened.
It's amazing that he kept it decades later. It was entered, these entries were from 1994.
But he thought the whole time that he was smarter than the average bear.
Oh, that is so true. This guy, he was smug.
He was arrogant.
But he was smug. How can I explain him? He totally had this hangdog look about him.
He had a pedo look about him.
Well, he did. He looked creepy.
He looked like a pedo, seriously.
But he had like this hangdog, saggy-eyed, like sad sack look about him. But he was one of these guys who fancied himself, I'm collected, I'm smart, I'm a psychologist
he was
kind
a
of
catch.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Daisy, his twin, took the stand and talked about the last conversation that she had with her brother. It was Freddie calling their older sister. So the older sister's there and Daisy was present, and the older sister answers the phone and she goes, Freddie? And he goes, yeah. And he sounded kind of odd. So she said, are you okay? And he said, yeah. And she said, are you at Ron's house? And he said, yeah. And then he said, I just wanted to call and tell you I loved you, and I love Pumpkin too. And that was her little daughter. And that was the last Daisy or her older sister or anyone heard from Freddie. And Daisy described his voice as being out of it, and he seemed like something was wrong, that kind of thing. But Anyway, so all the DNA evidence, all the witnesses building the prosecution's case came in. And in response, when it was the defendant's side to present their case, well,
arrogant person got up and testified on his own behalf.
Ron Hyde, being smarter than everybody in the room, testified.
Or smarter than the average bear.
On direct examination, he tried to ingratiate himself. And so the lawyer was trying to humanize him. And, you know, he was talking about his work as a youth pastor and how, you know, he would take these young boys, and Freddie seemed like he was kind of wild and a little bit out of control, and he would give him clothing and food and treated him like a son. Okay. So he says on the last night that he saw Freddie, again, Freddie seemed a little bit out of control, and he was upset because he had been in a fight with his sister. So, you know, Pastor Hyde tells him that
he doesn't deserve that title.
No, he doesn't. It's the work of the devil, not God.
Yep,
but we all
exactly.
know that. We all know that. And so, so he tells Freddie, I'm going to take you home. And Freddie's like, well, I don't want to go to my grandma's house in Yulee. I want to go. I have some relatives in Illinois. Can you take me there? And he's like, no, I'm not taking you there. I'm going to you're going to Yulee. And then Freddie apparently expressed an interest to stay at the beach in this Jacksonville beach place. And anyway, Hyde gets him in the car, and they're driving to Yulee, and Hyde says when they are on a bridge on Interstate 17, I think. Okay. So he says, Freddie is upset and grabs the wheel, forcing Hyde to stop the car. Freddie then runs out of the car, and they're on this bridge area.
And like heads in the opposite way.
Exactly. And it's a very wooded, rustic area around. And so Hyde testifies that he sees a truck. I think it was a truck.
It was a black pickup truck.
Yes, a black pickup truck pull over and, slow down and stop. So he assumes that Freddie is getting in and getting a ride. And that's the last he's seen of him. And so, anyway, so that was his testimony on the stand. And the cross-examination was very brief. It was like a 30-minute cross-examination. And the judge had to interrupt a number of times. I wish she had a gavel to bang. She didn't bang a gavel, but I felt like she needed like a baseball bat gavel, because what was happening was the prosecutor was like, the prosecutor was so hot and heated, and he was trying to, get Hyde to admit certain things and things that were fairly obvious, and Hyde wouldn't do it. Hyde was cool as a cucumber.
Cool as a sociopath.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for example, the prosecutor hands him a tax return, and he's like, on this tax return, you swore under the penalty of perjury that what you're going to say is true. Isn't that right? And you signed this tax return. And Hyde looks at the tax return and goes, I don't see my signature. And it wasn't there. And so the prosecutor is like, in my head, I'm like, dude, why'd you do that?
Exactly.
But anyway, so
somebody needs to be fired for that stuff.
Yeah. So the prosecutor goes, well, this is an exact duplicate of what you submitted to the IRS. And you said, you know what I mean? Like he just kind of went on. And the point was, Hyde had taken, I want to say 3 boys. And I believe 2 of them were Laster children. One was Freddie, and included them as dependents on at least 2, possibly 3 of his tax returns. I think 2 of his tax returns.
I thought I saw 3. So
yeah.
We'll call it 2.5.
Yeah, exactly. 2.5. And he said they were his foster kids.
Right.
And so the prosecutor was trying to get him to admit that he lied under the penalty of perjury, and Laster wouldn't do it. He would say,
well, because it's so much easier to get people on tax fraud than anything else. So he had a backup in case this, murder trial didn't go through.
He would say like, well, technically I wasn't a foster parent, but in reality I was, and that's what my accountant told me to put, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So whatever dance the prosecution initially started doing was not a great dance. However, what he brought out in very quick succession was that Laster had a charcoal gray Camaro, even though Laster tried to characterize it as silver while he was on the stand. Yep. He said that the shirt, the checkered red, white, and blue shirt, did look like one that he owned. And I believe that There was not only Freddie's blood on the shirt, but his DNA in the armpits of the shirt.
In the inside of the armpits.
Exactly.
So like he had worn it. Yeah.
Right. He basically said, oh, I was giving that shirt away at a yard sale. I probably just gave it to Freddie. Like he had an answer for everything.
Right.
He admitted that he gave Freddie an egg crate for camping, and so he was trying to excuse all of these
He was
pieces
trying to put doubt in it.
Of course he was. And basically, the position of the defense was it's no surprise that Hyde's DNA was on these items because Freddie was constantly at Hyde's home.
It's true.
I believe that all of Freddie's siblings testified at this trial. The saddest one was his older brother who had been molested by Hyde, but that information was not allowed in at trial. And he said it was the regret of his life that he didn't protect his younger brother. Yeah. And so that was extremely sad testimony. But ultimately, the jurors took just a few hours to find Ronnie Hyde guilty of the murder of Freddie Laster.
Ronnie Hyde was sentenced to LWOP. And in Florida, unlike so many states, LWOP actually means forever. You don't get to apply for parole at any time. You are there for your entire life. Now, following his sentencing, Kathy, Hyde was actually charged with 25 additional counts that related to all the child porn. And he made a deal with the prosecutors and actually wound up pleading guilty to 3 of them. He was sentenced to an additional 7 years, but it was to run concurrently. So basically, it doesn't mean anything because it's not like he's getting out of prison anyway.
Right. But it does mean something.
Well, no, it does because
it does
it's on
mean
the
something
record.
to the victims and it's on the record.
But not in terms of actually adding any time to his prison sentence.
Correct.
Unfortunately, Freddie Laster's head and limbs were never found. He was finally laid to rest in a modest grave 23 years after his murder. Thank you for listening.
We hope you liked the black and white video that we gave you last week.
And if you haven't watched it, please do.
Right.
We did it in black and white because it was the first episode of our new 5th season.
I know.
So we're just trying to mix it up a little bit.
And because our editor, Abigail, knows how to do that.
And she's awesome. If you haven't joined Patreon, we do have a free 7-day trial at the $10 level. So you get all this awesomeness for free for 7 days. And hopefully you will keep listening.
Hopefully you'll want to stay. Hopefully
Exactly.
you'll want to stay. And I guess that's that. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please subscribe. So
Yep.
we appreciate everyone who does.
And 5-star reviews are welcome.
Oh, for sure.
The rest are not allowed.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening.